Hi, thanks all for coming to this panel discussion today. My name is Mia Powell and I'm Head of New Business at Pretty Bird in London. With me on this fantastic panel, we have Resh Sidhu, who is the Executive Creative Director at AKQA, David Xing, aka Xingy, aka Digital Prophet, and then we also have the fantastic Anastasia, who is the co-founder and creative director of Made of Millions. I'm so sorry about that. There we go. Jet lag is kicking in already. All right, so I'm going to kick off with a massive thanks to all of you for joining. It's a really important cause, I think, that we all can agree on. So I'm just going to start with a very simple question of, how would you define intersectionality? Over to you, Resh.
Oh, I think it's just such an interesting topic. For me, it's defined by the different ways I identify, and what intersectionality is, how those different identities collide together, and the way that we can be discriminated against because of those identities. And we were talking earlier on about what that means, and often sometimes you're not even aware of those things. And now, as the conversation is heating up and the topics are heating up, and the younger generation are asking those questions that were very taboo. When I graduated from university, it was very taboo at that time. No one really said anything. You didn't really question it. It was the way it was. But for me, intersectionality is about, I'm a woman. I'm also a woman of color. I'm also a mother. I'm a creative director. I'm in many, many things. I come from, statistically, I shouldn't be group creative director at AKQA because I came from a neighborhood where schools were not invested in. We were the minority, so getting an education and getting to university was a huge, huge thing. But when you actually step back and think about all of those elements and all of those identities that you have, how does that impact your career? How does that impact your life? At what point do you begin to question them? And for me, that is intersectionality, is when those elements come together and you feel there's a threat of discrimination. And what does all of that mean?
Wow, okay, cool. Over to you.
Yeah, look, I vibe that answer completely, but here's where I think, I can't even say the word, man.
Intersectionality?
It's just way too much for me, but because at the end of the day...
How would you cut it down?
For me, it's just about how can you be real?
Okay.
And the challenge is, I just left I was an executive at quite a large organization called Verizon Media, Yahoo, AOL, TechCrunch, Engadget, HuffPost, a bunch of brands, And the reality of where we are today is that if you can't be real in any category of where you feel is your identity, which is the word that you definitely have sort of indicated, then where are you going to exist? And where you used to exist was on the fringes, which is ironic because in this room, the 6 of you are sitting on the edges. And if you think about it, humans, firstly, you don't ever want to sit together. So I don't know, you're sitting front row because you have no choice, but the rest of you, most humans don't do this. You sit way at the very back where the house of the goddess was, because if this sucks, you want to sneak out with never being identified. And that's what humans are. But the truth is, there's a chasm that we're part of. And particularly in this industry where there are almost 8 billion people on planet Earth, 50% of them have never known life without the internet. There's this whole intersection where we're just trying to understand how to take what is, in essence, an industry that was homogenized and turn it into bloody straight up realness, man. And maybe or maybe not, slap a brand around it if it feels right. But one thing I do want to say that has nothing to do with your question is that I want to make sure, because there's just a few friends in here, we get to the shit you want to talk about. So forget Slido, those instructions were awesome, but we may or may not get to it. Just make sure as we get towards the end, raise your hand if you have questions that aren't being addressed, and we'll address them dead on. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Cool. All right. Anastasia?
Tough act to follow. I would say for me, intersectionality is first and foremost identifying unique problems or discriminations that can happen as a result of identities colliding. And I think there's ways to look at intersectionality in a way that's more neutral, which is I have certain identities about myself, and then in that intersecting point is kind of uniquely me, which is one way to look at it. But I do think using this as a tool to identify unique problems or stigmas is actually a really important aspect of the concept. And so Made of Millions is we work entirely in mental health. And so when you think about the idea of intersectionality as it relates to mental health, as mental health intersects with gender, and if you look at how women are affected by mental health versus how men are affected by mental health, it starts to bring up really key and unique moments of stigma that we would try to address as a foundation, as an organization.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think as well, what we need to consider is some of these issues are below the surface. You can identify someone as a male or a female. Well, you used to be able to. I think there are quite a lot of non-binary people now existing that are a lot more open and transparent about their own identities. But if you're someone looking from the outside inwards, who's to say that if someone's got a mental
100%.
issue, or who's to say what their religion is or their sexuality? Like I've personally had quite a lot of bias put on me for certain things, just at face value. But I'm someone that has been to therapy. I am someone that is quite openly sort of able to talk about that stuff. And I think for me, it's like representation in the advertising industry can be quite problematic. So, on the surface, we might see different ethnic, cultural, sexual, gender identities being represented, but behind the scenes, they are being defined through lenses of people who have default identities. And when I say default identities, I'm talking about white, middle-class men. So when we apply that to, say, the digital landscape, which is kind of predominantly driven by white, middle-class men, how do we make that shift in representation? Because, it's coming from a lens which is not our own. So what are your thoughts on that? That's an open question anyone can answer.
Can I have a crack at it?
Go.
There are two challenges with those statements for me. So, and not to be contentious, I'm going to back it up with you. You're an extrovert, by the way.
Am I?
Aren't you?
Oh.
And so given that's the case, you typically are probably, as somebody who's very confident, you're not backwards in coming forward. It's awesome. But there's a bunch of people who are introverts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're an introvert, it's very, very hard to identify with those identities.
Yeah.
So you may become an extrovert somewhere else. You may be very flamboyant in your fashion, which is amazing, but you may actually be a closed social fight. And so what I think is amazing about that is understanding what those special powers are. So I mentor people who are of difference. So somebody may suffer heavily from ADHD, and I would suggest that they probably don't become an accountant, but maybe photography. So they're able to concentrate and put those powers into something that becomes superpowers. They don't become, that it's not like it's disarming to understand that, hey, that's a great interest, but maybe we can channel that energy into here, because then you don't have to live in a medicated environment, which is shit anyway. And I just think that's part of the problem, is we go to the path of least resistance, and that's conformity, and that's very different to where we are today. We're miles away from that being utopia, but where I just wanted to add a filter of different series, fundamentally, when you talk about white dudes, middle class, whatever, running the digital platformy bits, yes, but what they are not are the creators. So there are three dynamics that are going on. The vast majority of internet traffic are going to 3 or 4 different places, as we all know. And that's, you know them, Amazon and Apple and Google and Facebook, blah, blah. And then you've got the rest, which is all about the creator platforms, which I'm really fascinated by. And that's the likes of, TikTok, which is the new Vine, which is the new Instagram, which is the blah, blah, blah. But they're all creators platforms, where people actually have this agnostic environment to be able to jam on top of. Mm-hmm. That's creativity, and that for me creates empathy different to an audience. And the rest is all publish. So you can sit there and you can interact with that by commenting. But that's becoming less lively in the world of these platforms. So I guess my point is, yep, the undertone might be agnostic, but the overtone of where expression happens comes where people embrace these platforms in ways that allows them to do it, that feels real. And if you can identify with that, and brands identify that levity, I think it totally changes the landscape. We just have to wait for a bunch of those white dudes to die off, and then we're in a better place.
Amazing. Okay, so bottom line, let's just wait for them all to kind of kick it. Okay, over to you, Resh.
I have a different perspective, and I respect that, David. But for me, it's like that's total bollocks, because throughout my whole career, it has been a bunch of white dudes that have been in the creative
in the C-suite.
leadership in the C-suite.
Yeah.
And but I think it's interesting. Has that been a hindrance? No, because when I was younger, I was completely clueless and and fearless. And so when I did go in and I was approaching these creative agencies, it was through the lens of, yes, I am different and you need that.
Yeah.
And often the first job I got, it was 8 men, all white, all in their 40s. I was the first female that they had ever interviewed. I was the first female of color that they had ever interviewed. And that's because you bring in what you know. And did that make them bad? No. Did that make them, bad leaders, bad creatives? Not at all. But I think the challenge is that when we have to cultivate a culture where we are opening the doors to a variety of individuals that bring something, bring a flavor, a spice, something that your current team doesn't have. And it should always be about the work. None of us want to be judged on what we wear, what we look like, where we come from, the color of our skin, who our parents might be, what we're going through, but we should be judged on the quality of the work we bring. And if we're not good at it, get the hell out. How many times have you seen, individuals of a certain color, a certain gender be able to kind of scrape through just at a mediocre level, and yet you have women and other minorities working at a quadruple rate of that, but still not achieving the same. So you've got to question, what is going on? What teams do I have? As a creative director, what teams do I have? Does that bring diversity into the work that we then put out? And if you're in an environment where you're not cultivating that, then ask those questions and cultivate it, do something about it. I'm very much of, yes, it is this way, but what can we do about it? I don't want to wait for anybody to pass away or, knock off and then there's a chance. Absolutely not. You need to grab that by the balls and you need to voice those concerns. And if they're not being heard, then you have to question, are you at a agency that is cultivating that culture where you are allowed to bring in different diverse skill sets for the right reason? Because it shouldn't just be ticking the box. I don't want to be a diversity hire. I don't want to be brought into a panel because I've had panel requests, we need a woman. I'm like, oh, for God's sake. That's not what this conversation is about. We have to move on from that.
Yeah.
It's about the right talent and the diversity of the talent. Once you get that diversity in the C-suite, then you'll see that coming through more. We need to get it into the C-suite.
So you think it's top level, it's not bottom level up? Because there was the Race Regulations Act in 1976, I think, which was implemented in the UK, and it was pro-discrimination. Like, the only way that people of colour back then were able to get a job was because someone was ticking a box.
Yeah.
I don't think that's particularly right, but now look at where we are today. And I think positive discrimination has a good impact, but also a negative one. And I think, I fucking hate being put in a box. I was called a square peg in a round hole in my last job. I left a week later because I was like, I don't want to be a square peg in a round hole. I'm a round hole in a round peg. Whatever. But just picking up on that point of, it should be coming from the C-suite. How do we define whether these are the top candidates for the job without looking past their skin color or their technical ability or even their mental ability? Like, how can you choose someone when they don't even know that they've got opportunities in front of them? It's.
But how was Resh? How you said there were a bunch of dudes in their 40s interview you. Who's the one who took the risk to interview a woman of color? Was it a client that said, "Hey man, we've just won an account. There's too many dudes in this room. It's not working for me." How did it work?
I sent my work through and they couldn't work out whether I was a guy or a girl for my name.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And so they thought I was a guy the whole time they were having a conversation with me. I thought, this guy's really sassy. And I was like, you need me, here's why you need me. And then when I went in, they were so gobsmacked because I turned up. And I just turned up as me. But at that time, I didn't think about I was a woman.
Jeez.
I didn't think about I was a woman of color. I didn't think about I was a woman where, my mom worked 3 jobs to put me through university. I didn't think about those things.
Yeah.
What I want to try and change is through telling my story, because I've been able to navigate that space and not let it piss me off. Like, don't let it, that's the thing. I don't want a younger generation to come through and let it put you off or turn you away from it. Because if I can do it without having these platforms to voice anything or feeling that I could voice anything. And when I became a mother, again, that changed. I had 2 sons. I brought up my 2 sons whilst still pushing for my career because I was passionate about it. And I knew I was damn good at it. And if I was damn good at it, then that's where I wanted to be. And so when I turned up to that interview, they were so gobsmacked. I think they barely said any words, and the work spoke for itself.
And how long ago was that, Mel?
18 years ago.
Fascinating context.
18 years ago. And they have been my greatest mentors. You know, they were fantastic. And what it did is it opened their eyes to, oh God, yeah, we're just a bunch of dudes. Because they don't, we have to create an environment where we enable people to question and look and say, okay, is this right? Or what happens if we throw something else into the mix? I think we're judgmental, we're worried about saying the wrong thing, and we shouldn't be, because there's no right or wrong. It's just about, if you want to create, my single goal as a creative director is how can I create the best work that has the most impact? And the way I want to do that is by bringing the most talented and smartest thinkers in a room.
But Resh, do you think that you would have even been given a chance if they knew that you're a woman 18 years ago, if they couldn't figure out your name?
Don't know.
Do you think you'd still be sat
I think
today with
I would, because the work was strong enough. The work
Yeah.
was damn good.
Yeah.
So back up what you have to say with the quality of your work. And I felt, but to be honest, my whole career, I felt I've had to work 20 times harder than any man in the room, 20 times harder than any white man in the room, because you stand out. So the spotlight is on you, and you have to prove that. And then when I became a mother, I felt like I had to work even harder. Why? I mean, why did I put all these worries and concerns into my head? Because the culture, the advertising culture, is not set up for a mother, a woman of any color to succeed. But times are changing, and that's great. It's really good, and we have to work towards that. We have to get not only people in the C-suite, we have to get people feeling confident to talk about all issues, so it's normal, it's okay. And yes, I can go home at a decent time to put my kids to bed and still get the work done.
Yeah. But Shingy, you're a recent father, right?
I am.
You've got kids.
Yeah.
What about you, Anastasia? Do you have any children?
No, I do not.
Be interesting to see what your output is on this. How has it affected you and your work schedule? And do you feel, Anastasia, that it would affect you if you were to have a child? Would you be able to still be the co-founder and founder and creative director and boss bitch of Made of Millions without it? You know?
I mean, I think women are proving time and time again that it's absolutely possible. I think that's another area of stigma, like, oh, you're a mom now, you can't do all this shit. And like, women are proving it over and over that they can do it, that they can figure it out, that they can get the help they need, that they can manage their schedules and do the work that they need to be doing. I just think that perception needs to change of women can't do it. Like, that's really the only thing that's kind of like holding people back. Like, we'll figure out our schedules, we'll figure it out. Like, it's
Yeah, it's no
it's
big
not
deal.
yeah, it's not that hard.
I apologise on behalf of men.
Thank you.
Frankly, men are idiots. At the end of the day, once we realise that women rule the world, we're in a whole better place once we get there. But we've got a ways to go, apparently. But I do think, to answer your question directly, how it affected, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and up until she came, I was Peter Pan. But what it's really done is it quickly isolates your priorities and your values. The name of this panel is I Am Human. Having a child made me human. And I probably, if I knew it was this good, I'm one of 10 kids, by the way, so I come from a tribe of humans already. But
Wow. Oh my
yeah, two-bedroom house, 12 people, Chinese Catholics, we're unstoppable, and a whole lot of therapy. But what's amazing for me is that if I knew it was this good, I would have had kids way earlier, which is a weird thing to say because my bride would not necessarily agree to that because she has to strive for her career. But the challenge is this. I have noticed that with working mothers, it's a superpower. So it's not subtractive. So once people realize this, women and then become these incredible mothers at the same time, it's additive. With dudes, it's subtractive. But with women, it is absolutely additive. So not only do you become all of what you are, this whole thing on top, which is more relatable or even better organized and all these, and also giving life to a human, my God, it's a whole nother layer of awesome, which we don't realize. Because what happens here, the stigma is you're going to be off for 9 months looking after this kiddo and you're going to be crap when you come back, and that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Because you come back with a whole nother value of what you were, and it's more important on top of it. And it's even more incredible and probably more relatable to the audience you're trying to sell your shit to anyway, so why not? We just don't get it.
Everyone have babies.
Yes,
Have
smart
babies.
people should be having kids.
The takeaway.
Procreate. I have a bit of an issue around it because of that. You are taking at least 9 months out of your life, your career, and say your peer is a man. He's not taking 9 months out of his career, and he is striding up and he's going up the ladder whilst you're stood here. So how do you level that balance? Like, how do we do that? Because no matter what, yeah, okay, you can go off and have a baby, that's great, and you can come back and still be amazing, but there is still that gap between it's still going to be a career gap between your peer that hasn't had to take time out to have a child.
Can I just throw something in here? I don't mind to suck the air out of the room real quick, but Resh works for a pretty open agency. I mean, AKQA is pretty dope that way, and have been, because they've been at the forefront of that for a long time, even when they got scooped up by WPP. But what I do think is amazing about this whole situ is that, you know, for some people, working for an agency may not be an aspiration anymore. So if you think about it, there are 6 ways that brand today, which is the new Medici, is being harassed. They're being harassed by media agencies who don't own any assets, so they're basically trying to figure out how to rationalize media spend and doing it agnostically. Awesome. You have creative agencies that don't own any scale, so they're saying we can touch hearts and minds, but we can't reach them, so that's what media agencies typically do.
Yeah.
And then you have tech companies that say, forget about the human, we're going to talk about performance-based marketing, which will get you the ability to do the machine stuff while you focus on good creative. Okay, I respect that. Mm-hmm. Then you also have publishers, like I used to represent, which come in and say, you suck at conversation to these people, so let's help you be editorial. And then you sit back and go, the consultants are coming. So Deloitte's and EY's, so the accountants are coming to take your job because they've been hanging out with the CEO saying, let me rationalize your CMO budget now. And then they sit there and go, my God, 5 people bash me over the ears, I'm going to do it myself. Mm. So brands are creating their own in-house agencies. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The only challenge for them is to think about how to stay culturally relevant and attract great talent and then judge it. But I would argue that given those 6 environments where the brand is at the heart of it, you don't have to go the traditional route anymore if you don't want to. So if you are of difference, maybe you need to create something that's different. Maybe you need to be something that's different. Mm-hmm. And those rare opportunities, being executive at a great creative agency like Resh is, that maybe that is an aspiration, but it doesn't have to. You don't have to think. And when you know, I see you talk about things like ladders, and I understand that's a reality because I'm at a different point in my career. What a shame that we have to think like that, because that's not how it should. So I'm saying there are other places, particularly when people are not necessarily vulnerable, but are confident in their career, but don't fit the type of category that fits within the model that you see today. Yeah. There is a beautiful opportunity to be different.
And just on that segue, sorry, Anastasia, I was just going to say that you are an award-winning person that's carved something out for themselves, and your platform and the way that you designed your platform, Made of Millions, has won because of just doing that.
Right. Yeah, and so I think that's actually a really important point, is because if you look at the nonprofit space, especially when you look at mental health in the nonprofit space, it's portrayed and it's delivered to people in a very clinical, very kind of cold, drab way. And so there's like this old guard of nonprofits out there in the world right now that are just delivering information in a way that just doesn't connect with sufferers. So imagine people that are like at the lowest point in their lives, essentially, and they're turning to the internet and they're looking for answers, and they're just met with very cold language that's clinical, and it's hard to understand, and not to mention you throw bad design on top of that, and that is just going to be completely not helpful. And so for us as an organization, our foundation was born out of that frustration. So we took our branding and marketing and design backgrounds and actually took it to a space that was totally lacking, and actually infused it with storytelling and good design, and included inclusivity and diversity and storytelling from different points of views in order to make sure that people that were not heard or were not being reached were actually being represented and showcased in a way that was meaningful. And so I think that's incredibly like an important point. When you're fed up with the system, you have to like make your own thing, you know.
Fuck the system. Yes. Sorry, I just swear so much. So that brings me on to my next point, which is, you know, you're bringing all of this together, and I think what I have an issue with being under 30 is that everything is quite modular, and actually we need to be thinking about things in a less sort of like compartmentalized way. And like, I think what you're saying is like you brought all of these different aspects into one space, and what we've been doing, or what I've seen in the industry, is like, yeah, black people over here, gay people over here, women over here. Dude, we're all the same, and actually you can be black, gay, and a woman. What are you doing to sort of make something that connects and actually speaks to these people who are across all of these intersections? Because I personally don't see much out there that is doing that. On our Advertising Week Europe talk, we had some fantastic speakers from sort of Gay Times and this amazing publication called Galdem, and these are people who are my gen doing it, but you know, I can't wait 20 years to see these people at the top of, you know, Google, Apple, whatever, doing this. So kind of a generational question, because I'm keen to see how you think we can adapt the way that brands are thinking and agencies are thinking to respond to this new type of like conversation and output.
I think you just need to come to the AKQA New York office and see the individuals that we have. I think it's interesting in terms of what you said around looking at people just as a human. And that's what attracted me to this panel, is stop having the conversation about where we're from, the color of our skin, just look at everybody as a human being. And when we're hiring and we have you have this shift and cycle within agencies where there's a mass exodus, there's a new hires, younger generation coming through, and you know, the older generation shifting out to go and start new companies and go do new things. And there's a huge opportunity there to look at the type of individuals that you are bringing into the agency, and then the type of culture that is creating. Do you want to get up and go into work with just a bunch of great humans that challenge you, push you, open your mind to things? You know, I'm a mom, I'm straight, I'm married, you know, just as boring as they come. It wasn't until I joined the New York office, not that London wasn't like this, but it wasn't until I joined the New York office and, you know, I got to work with and be close friends with such a wider diversity of individuals from different backgrounds. You know, they identify in different ways from the, you know, LGBT community, and what it does is it broadens your perspective, it broadens how you see things, and it also broadens the type of work that you do. It makes you, it inherently makes you question the type of work that you're putting out, and then the way you question the briefs that land on your desk, and the way you question the output. So it's really about where you work, wherever that is, wherever you choose to land. You have 3 panelists up here in very different stages of their lives, doing very different things. And I think it's about, before you may have followed this path, which was like, I need to go from a junior designer all the way up to an executive creative director. You don't need to do anything. You need to do whatever satisfies your creative soul. And if you're not satisfied, right now you have more options available to you as a woman or as a person of color than you ever have before. And that's why I say it's such an exciting time for the younger generation, or even for the older generation, for anybody, because there's an opportunity to get out there and then cast your story and cast your role in any way you want to be. I recently had one of my favorite and oldest mentors, who was co-founder of AKQA, say to me, after we were having this conversation about where do I fit in, what do I do, like I'm bored, I need to be challenged, where do I go next? And he said to me, Resh, you know what, you're not stone. We're not made out of stone. We're made out of clay. We can mold ourselves into anything we wish to be. And I loved that. And it helped me reframe where my mind was at, what I was thinking about, and rather question, am I going like crazy for thinking these things? What's going on? Where's my creative soul going? It's like, yeah, totally, I'm clay. And it made me think about, what do I want to be today? Or what kind of company do I want to work for? What kind of place do I want to be? What kind of people do I want to engage with? And what do they bring to me, and what do I bring to the table? It's really about putting everything away. It's about being a great human being and bringing all of you, and not being afraid to bring all of you.
So if we all believe that, how does mental health become so apparent today? Is it that it's been there, and it just hasn't had a title, and it hasn't been aware, or you know? So I think that's incredible. I mean, we all should go work for AKQA apparently, which is awesome. But the truth is, there is more stress, anxiety, and just anxiousness generally around society. Forget this industry, and forget identity. Mental health there's a big light shine upon it. So when you hear that aspiration, which is awesome, why is the mental health as it is today? Why is this focus there?
I think there's this moment. So there's a couple of things, right? So more people are being vocal about it. More people are speaking out about anxiety and depression, and those are fairly common instances of mental health. the other part about it is that I think managers and companies and employers are finally realizing that there has been this underlying like silent crisis that's been happening. And so the major stat that gets thrown around about mental health is like 1 in almost 5 people are struggling. So if you look at your immediate team, if you look at this audience, like there's a number of people here or in your company that are struggling at any given point. And so when you think about that and you realize that as a manager, my team is suffering and I'm not only not doing anything about it, I'm not in a position to address the issue. Like I don't actually know how to help somebody that's struggling with anxiety. And on the inverse, the employee is not really aware of the options that are available to them in terms of accommodations, asking for better benefits, asking for flexible schedules, even starting a conversation. So there's just kind of like this disconnect that's happening. But on top of all of that, I think just the sheer volume of people that are starting to be reaching their breaking point in terms of I can't take this anymore and I need help. I think that's really what's starting to drive that message forward. And on top of that, we're having people that are really advocating, that are turning to media and social media in particular, that are starting to say, I'm struggling with this and it's okay. And they're being met by community and it's just kind of amplifying this conversation. So it's kind of a bummer, but it's an exciting time to be a part of it because I really think that there's going to be change that can start to happen on a both personal level, but also within organizations that's just been missing for a very long time.
Yeah, I think, well, being part of the new gen, we are a lot more vocal and
100%.
You know, we create safe spaces for awkward conversations and we're quite emotionally intelligent. But I don't think it stops there. I think, as you say, like, maybe managers aren't qualified to maybe ask the right questions, and part of your organization is to help educate people into doing that. I think that's one of the biggest things that why we created I Am Human is to just make a safe space for people to just ask really awkward questions. And we've got 17 minutes left, which I think is a good time to kind of cut off the panel discussion now and open it up to the audience. If anyone's got any burning questions to ask some of the sort of the panelists, please do, like, you know, crazy questions. Hello there, Sarah in the front, I've never met before. There you go. Awesome.
So my question isn't specifically directed to any of you guys, but I just wondered, this conversation has been fantastic and we're trying to do more of these. Obviously, we did it in Europe, now we're doing it here. We want to not wait for every advertising week to have these conversations. Do you guys have any advice to people in the room, people watching at home, about how they can have these conversations internally more frequently?
Want to take that, Rish?
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends. We're all in, again, I can only speak for AKQA and myself and my experience in the New York office. We have an amazing HR team. And I think your question touches upon something that Mia, you said earlier on, is how do you, and also to what Anastasia is talking about, all these topics, how do they happen in one office and not another office, and how they happen in one agency and not another agency, or in the Googles or the Facebooks? It's people. You have people there that care about it and champion in it, and then they talk about it, and then they give you and cultivate an environment where you can be heard. Because if someone's listening, that's the first step. And there was a long period of time when there was no one there listening. You could report things, but there was no one there listening. And reporting something and being listened to is very different. And then within our office, we have a group of individuals that are committed to listening and then acting upon that. Like, what can we actually do about that? So if someone has, I'll give you an example. We recently, without naming any names, we recently had this lovely young creative director who was going to be a father. Now, completely twisting that on its head. He was going to be a dad, and it was the first time that he spoke to HR and he spoke to the team, and he got this phenomenal package, and he was able to have time off with his daughter, who is adorable, 6 months, and that time was so important to him. And also the value he got, that he was listened to, he was heard. He wasn't sure he was going to get anything as being a father, but he got equally the same amount as he would if he was the mother. And that to me was a real fundamental step of what's happening within our group of people, within our office. And why is it happening? Because people are driving that conversation forward. So voice whatever you want to talk about, and find that individual that's going to fight for you. And that individual can come in many different disguises. It doesn't have to be the C-suite. You don't always need to go there. And I think that's the thing. And if as a company you are in the C-suite, don't think you have to be you don't always have to be the person that everybody's going to go to, because it's not always going to work like that. So think about who can be the person, or who can be the people that others are naturally going to gravitate towards to have those conversations, and then commit, really truly commit to, when we get that information, what are we wholeheartedly going to do about it? Because getting that information can be really hard. And we've had I think the agency has had some tough conversations with itself. Work-life balance, being a mother within the agency, just young creatives coming to the agency, a number of different things. So cultivating that culture inherently will enable you to have the conversations and then do something about that.
I think one of the issues, though, that and Jack was asking, how do we bring this conversation to agencies? Because we are effectively saying, you guys are doing it wrong, and we'd like to educate you on how to do it right. And agencies are kind of like, well, we don't feel comfortable with you saying that to us. I mean, how do we break down that barrier? We're really just trying to help, and we're just trying to open up that conversation. I think it's fantastic when you've got a very open-minded agency like AKQA who are willing to take in that sort of, help or suggestions.
Once again, I won't name names, but I went in. I had a meeting at a quite big media organisation last week, and they had an internal D&I event going on.
Sure. And
I was meeting with someone who was pretty senior there, and he didn't realise it was there, so we had to go into a different room. But on the way out, he was like, this is just something that we do to, make people feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa.
That sucks.
It does, and it does. It's there's no winning when that's the case, I suppose.
Well, there's
or
two
you
ways.
have to work harder.
But Jack, there's two ways to look at that. There's those that say, we've got to do this because we've got to be seen to be doing it. And that's one type of person. And then there's another type of person who, without permission, is just doing it. Those are the ones you need to seek out, Those are the ones that are just going to get on and do it. And whether they get permission or not, they'll ask for forgiveness. It doesn't matter, because they're committed to changing it. And if things don't change, then those individuals leave and they go somewhere else, and it's more for you, because you want to retain that talent and that energy and that passion. Because if they're that passionate about the place they work, imagine how passionate they're going to be about the work they work on. So I think it's difficult, because how do you find those individuals and there are these little pockets of magic that are happening, and people are doing events and bringing in, last summer we had a whole women's speaker series in the New York office, and we brought in all a different array of different women, founders, just to inspire the team and open up the conversation. It's about finding those agencies and the right individuals. Because I think at a certain level, or certain individuals would be like, no, we've got it, we've done it. We've got a 1 day a week where we bring in donuts and we talk about diversity, and you're like, you haven't got it. So it's like, you can't save everybody, you can only save the people throwing towards you, so save them.
Anastasia?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. There's this scary part of conversations around diversity, inclusivity, and mental health becoming trendy, and so brands and agencies just want to jump on board because they're like, oh, we need to be a part of this conversation. But if internally your culture doesn't line up and you don't have things in place to actually ladder up and deliver on those things, you're just not doing right by your employees, because they're coming to a place that was sold to them as this kind of promised land, and then they're realizing that they don't actually have great mental health policies, for example, or they don't actually understand how to deal with somebody in a true crisis. And so I think what we're going to start, hopefully, and maybe not hopefully, but start seeing is people, and we're seeing it now, people are being very selective. There's about where they choose to work. Like they're doing their research, and I think the talent pool is going to go to those places that are actually going to be able to deliver on the things that are they're kind of selling. Because it's a real bummer to like use your progressive mental health policies as a recruiting tool and then like not deliver on it for people. I think that's a really bad thing. But on top of that, I think that the other kind of coming back to the very beginning of this question is what we've seen and what it takes is somebody to be a champion. And so you can't sit and wait and just assume that somebody in your organization or in your company is going to make these changes for you. You need to be that champion, whether it's on the topic of diversity, of whether it's on the topic of mental health, and you're going to find those people in your organization that are just as passionate, that want to come together, that want to have these conversations. Because these topics are very big and they're daunting, and so we talk about them, and then there's always that question of like, shit, what do we do next? Because it's so big and you almost don't know what to do. And so breaking it down, having things like this, celebrating small things within your organization as a step forward on positive mental health policy is even great, like a great start. And so just having that one person that can be a leader within your organization, and doesn't need to be high up by any means. It could be somebody more junior, more mid-level, that's totally fine. But they need that kind of champion to exist and kind of take that on too.
I'll give you some of my experience. So just leaving Verizon Media, prior to that was AOL. We had a bottoms-up, top-down approach, which was management were told, clearly culture is changing at the speed of lightning. We have to actually be part of it. And to be part of it, there are baselines. So give people permission to self-order, employee resources groups, pretty basic. But whatever you think is important as the greater audience of the organization, at that point in time was about 14,000 people. We had all these ERGs turn up, and they were awesome. And we celebrate Mental Awareness Health Week, which I just screwed up. Clearly I'm mental myself, but you get this idea where you celebrate this thing that makes it feel like it's contagious. But what you also have to understand is this is not about popular culture. Because the reality is we live in a world of popular culture and it hasn't worked out so well. And it's homogenized, so it's actually going to be more fragmented. So once we get over the fact that we're not 11 years old and we all want to be super popular, we have to understand that these things happen in smaller environments. And that's where I think these relationships become a dialogue as opposed to a monologue. And I think that's the step change that I have personally seen in about the last 4 or 5 years, particularly as digital platforms start to plateau out. So these groups are not about for everyone. They're open to everyone, but they may actually only relate to a certain group. And once an organization understands that, there might be a whole bunch of supporters inside it. It really, really, really works. But it has to come from top down, bottom up, because you have to have the permission to say, oh, we're open to having these. Well, how are we going to celebrate them? And it doesn't take much for an organization to help contribute to that. It could be financially.
Yeah.
It could be spatially.
Yeah.
It could be openly, meaning, hey, we want to dedicate 10% of your time to make sure you're doing things outside of it, not just for goodwill, but for things that help you be a better person. So, I think part of the end of the day is that you need to sort of gravitate to both of those things, which it really does. There is a management responsibility.
Yeah, and I think you need to, as managers, you need to be sending your employees the message that these conversations are okay, that they need to happen, that on an ongoing basis you're letting your employees know that as managers you're here for them. Here are initiatives that we're a part of. Like, I think I totally agree 100% that it needs to come from both sides. Like, employees need to be better educated and asking for certain things, and on the other side of it, managers kind of need to meet them and let them know about what's available. And it's just a matter of both sides kind of being educated and aware and empowered to really do those things.
Yeah, I'm really thankful for the company that I work in at the moment, Pretty Bird, which is female-led. But it's not just about our internal sort of commitment to diversity and inclusion. It's about expanding that and extending that out to the crews and the people that we work with externally as well. So we do have a 50-50 policy, and that hopefully will start to kind of ricochet out and create this ripple effect and actually impact the rest of the industry. And I'm just so thankful that I've got, my boss. For me, she's been absolutely everything, and
awesome. Thanks,
Juliet. But okay, so we've got time for one more question over there.
Hi. How do you address generational differences in your organizations, particularly working with Gen Z and millennials, and you still have some baby boomers in the workforce, and sort of those differences in creativity and communication styles.
So to reiterate, that is, how do the different sort of Gen Zers, Gen Xers work together synonymously? Okay.
Well, I think it's interesting because they've never appeared as problems or challenges. They've always appeared as opportunities.
Yeah.
Because we do. Everywhere I've worked, there's always been that, that generation gap. And when you are brainstorming or you're coming up with ideas or you're facing a challenging brief from a client, it's the diversity of that experience, the fearlessness of the unknowing fearlessness of the younger colleagues and the experience of the older colleagues, and that amazing mishmash of both of those together that actually allows you to tackle those briefs in a really interesting way. And I think that that's what's been really compelling about a lot of the work that we try to put out there, and a lot of the teams that we try to put together. Is when we do get a brief, we think about what team are we going to put on this, what team might be right for it, and what team is going to throw a grenade into the conversation. It's what it is. It's almost like you're an arsenal of creatives that you have, and being able to put them together so they can collaborate to really question and interrogate. Often when we get some briefs, you need to be making sure that you have, if you can, you have the audience that you're trying to speak to within that set. Because when you don't, it can go wrong really quickly. There's been times when you've had a bunch of men trying to brainstorm about women's products. That's not a bad thing, but have they actually spoken to a single woman about it? No. So then what do you do about that? So I think it's really like, a great creative team can crack any brief, but how do you bring the right conversations? And a lot of what we encourage, a lot of what I encourage in the creative team is go out there and put your work in front of people and challenge it and question it and let it be ripped apart and interrogate it and look at it from all angles, and don't just tick boxes, do things because it's driven by a true insight, because you've done the research and we've got a group of people that are really questioning everything. So it's less of a challenge of the generation gap, more of a seeing it as an opportunity.
Yeah, generational clash is great for creativity. I love an argument. It's great. Anything else to add on to that?
So the generation thing from a mental health perspective is actually really interesting because, and I'll use this anecdote. So we ran a campaign earlier this year that was called Dear Manager, and basically it was, we found sufferers that were willing to share their story, and they wrote a very short letter to their manager, kind of addressing their condition, but also using that as a moment to ask for an accommodation or help, or just kind of as a conversation starter. And I just remember going through the feed on Instagram, and there was one comment that was like, "This is the most millennial thing I've ever seen." and I saw that, and there was this part of me, and I was like, "What?" And then, but then I thought about it, and it's true. This openness about mental health is actually it is very millennial in a sense, because older generations are not talking about it. There's this idea of, you come to work and you leave your baggage at the door and you don't talk about anything on your personal life. And for us to ask not only everyone to kind of be more open to their bosses, but also like ask people that are not used to sharing those kind of experiences in a space that's already very stigmatized, it does raise very interesting ideas about how do we actually approach generation in terms of the generation gap in terms of mental health, because we don't want to be leaving people behind, and this particular messaging might not be resonating. So we need to, as an organization, make sure that we're looking deeper and creating messaging that is connecting to people and not leaving people behind, because we don't want to be just talking to one millennial group. We want to make sure that everyone's getting the message.
Was that your own comment?
Yes, I felt like trolling myself, yeah. No, it wasn't.
And that is all the time we have. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you Anastasia, Shingy and Rash, you've been amazing. Thank you so much.